Recording. Hello and welcome back to Welty at Home, the slow reading virtual book club that alternates works by Eudora Welty with works by authors connected to Welty. Today we are finishing our exploration of Eudora Welty's only children's novel, The Shoebird, and also a look at her other writings related to her love of children's literature. I am Anna Traylor, the education specialist at the Eudora Welty House and Garden, and we are grateful to Suzanne Mars, Eudora Welty's friend and biographer and professor emerita of Millsaps College, for guiding these discussions. And we are so grateful to all of our special guests that have joined us over the series and today as well, who I'll let Suzanne introduce in a moment. First, some quick housekeeping. To comment or ask a question, click the reactions button at the bottom of your screen and select raise hand. If you're on a tablet or a phone, you may have to tap the screen for this option to appear. A lively discussion often takes place in the chat as well, so be sure to glance over at the chat box every now and again, and I'll be sending a transcript of that complete chat box here at the end of this e-newsletter. So with that, Suzanne, where shall we begin today's discussion?
Well, today we have the great good fortune to have one of our club members who is a children's author herself with us to talk. Well, she's always with us on our groups, but to talk about her work in children's literature. And with her is her illustrator. So Alice Mitchell and Cheryl Perry. Alice is the author, Cheryl, the illustrator, are here. And then after we finished with that section, I want to spend just a minute with Joanne Connell, whose father worked at the office supply store here in Jackson, and who can tell us about the office supply and book sales and whether Eudora was signing books. This all came up early in our discussions, and so we thought we'll get the answers here today. So we'll do that, and then we'll move on to A Sweet Devouring and on fairy tales. So Alice, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Suzanne, for inviting me to comment, and thank you, Anna, for your preparation of some slides that we will show you. Children ages 9 to 95 will enjoy repeated readings of The Shoebird with its personification, symbolism, vocabulary, and themes. It uses action verbs in the active voice to propel the plot. Miss Welty does not tell us a story, she shows us a story. I always think that when a writer shows children the story, the children employ their own imagination and see the story and then develop a love of reading. Of course, illustrations enhance the experience. After local radio talk show host and the director of the library system invited me to write about our children's librarian, Miss Maddie, and her imaginary friend, Scooter Mouse, I met with Miss Maddie and with the board of the Miss Maddie Foundation. Portion of the sales from these books helps to support the Miss Maddie Foundation, which gives college scholarships to deserving high school seniors in the 3 counties served by our library system. Then my imagination took over, and I wrote a series of 5 books: Scooter Mouse and the Teddy Bears, Scooter Mouse and Rabbit, Scooter Mouse Finds the Library, Scooter Mouse Finds Christmas, and Scooter Mouse and the Pothole. At the suggestion of Miss Maddie, the Rejoice Dance Academy adapted 3 of the books as ballets to present to the kindergartens in the 3 counties, Pike, Amite, and Walthall counties. The music the music was selected by the Academy director. The Academy also presented Scooter Mouse and the Teddy Bears for the general public at the State Theater in downtown Macomb. The charge for admission was one smile. It played to a packed audience. The Academy again will present Scooter Mouse and the Teddy Bears for the kindergartens in Pike, Mid, and Walthall counties in February of 2026.
Would you like for me to go ahead and share these pictures on the screen?
That's fine, or we can just do it when we talk about the other event. To connect the dots for some of you, the books are published by the Magnolia Gazette Publishing Company, which is owned by Dr. Luke Lampton, who is a member of the board for Mississippi Department of Archives and History, and whose wife is the niece of the late Dr. Frank Lyle, who was a close friend of Miss Welty. The books are illustrated with exquisite watercolors and collages by artist Cheryl Perry, who is a member of the Welty Book Club, but who also has a special connection with the late Dr. Lyle, about which she will tell you. Since her illustrations really make the books, she will talk about her creative process, and will show you some slides, which Anna graciously has prepared, of 5 of the pages from the books. Cheryl?
Okay. Go ahead and show the 5 books, if you will, Anna.
I sure will. Can we all see the slide that says Scooter Mouse?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. So here's where all the 5 book covers, and as well as a couple of extras.
So I do not have background in art. My degree is in business from the University of Texas at Austin. And this is where I crossed paths with Miss Welty's friend, Dr. Frank Lyle. He was my instructor for a required semester of Shakespeare. At that time, I was also taking English. That was my minor. And so I was in his class. And the funny thing about it is, because it was a required class, I guess a lot of people like to skip class. And so he required that the only way you could miss a class was if somebody passed away in your family and you had to bring the obituary notice to class. So he was pretty strict about getting people in his class. So how I got to this point of making pictures is that as a child, I loved the photos and the pictures in the children's books. And when my husband first went to Mississippi State, his first job, I took a design class there. And then when we moved to Jackson, I took drawing with Lucy Webb Millsaps at Millsaps College, and I was hooked with art. And so when I moved to Macomb in 1981, that's where I met Alice. And when we stayed in touch even after John and I moved to San Antonio. And when her publisher said that she could select an artist for her first book, My Mama's Closet, she called me, and I was thrilled. And it's been really a lot of fun because it's very unusual for the author and an illustrator to work together. The publisher usually selects the illustrator. But Alice and I were able to collaborate on all of these books. And it was so much fun to imagine and talk about the initial pictures, sketch them, and then Alice did an initial layout of the book. Alice's word choices, especially the verbs, made it easy to visualize the characters' actions. The second book that we did was Our Game, and some of the same reference materials were used for creating those books. We chose our grandchildren as models, so that was fun. You want to go to the next slide, Anna? Scooter Mouse and the Teddy Bears. This was a lot of fun to do this book. The final illustrations were drawn in pencil and watercolor on 140-pound watercolor paper. Then they were scanned and sent to the graphic designer who did her magic in creating a book. This was a lot of fun. This book, Alice was so good about taking photographs. Even if I couldn't find them on the internet or in our personal files, I could say, Alice, I need a picture of some teddy bears, and she would get them all set up and send pictures. But the most fun was the time she asked Miss Maddie to get down on her hands and knees to look for a ball. And Miss Maddie was in her 80s, but Miss Maddie was game for anything to make these books happen.
To the right, am I still unmuted?
You're unmuted.
Okay, thank you. To the right, you will see Scooter Mouse as the character in the ballet. That's taken from our website. To the left, as the text reads, as the baseball bear crawled toward his ball, Scooter Mouse whizzed by and paused. Do you want to ride? Jump on. Off Scooter Mouse and the baseball bear zoomed, zipping around the stack corners and swooping under the newspaper racks. This last sentence, just descended upon me, and I think it was the most fun to write. Cheryl?
Go on to the rabbit.
Please. This book, Scooter Mouse and Rabbit, was a fun book to do because this story was based on my grandson's struggle to always find his lost rabbit. So that is, the blue rabbit never had a name. It was just Rabbit. So here he's teaching, Scooter Mouse is teaching Rabbit how to paint. Miss Maddie did do painted rocks to hand out for the kids. So this was a true fact from her life with Scooter Mouse.
And to the right, you will see a picture of the ballet audience at the Tylertown Library. And Miss Maddie is seated in the middle with her auto harp. She always liked to sing with the children before the ballet performance. And then Anna will show us 2 10-second videos. Thank you.
Did y'all hear that audio okay?
Yes, thank you very much.
And we're ready to move on to the next one.
Yes. Scooter Mouse Finds the Library. This was a fun book because we backtracked, or Miss Maddie did, and she told us the story, or the story that she told the children of how Scooter Mouse finds the library. This one was done just in watercolor. Scooter Mouse Finds Christmas. This was a really fun book, and this was an opportunity to do a lot of imagining and a lot of work with the internet to come up with horses and bicycles and a parade. just for fun, sometimes I would put in people or animals that I knew, like that's my dog with the Christmas sweater on, and the other two dogs belong to my son and his wife, and my husband's walking the dog. And the street scene was really one from Michigan. It was this lovely little small town that we saw there. So it was just a lot of fun to do. That was the book also that sort of broke me on, I think I had done all the detail work I could do. And go to the next slide. This is Scooter Mouse in the Pothole. And it was after that Christmas book, I had done a 2-page spread of a Christmas tree that took me weeks and weeks to do. And when Scooter Mouse in the Pothole was the next book, and it was right after we finished the Christmas book, I said, Alice, can we do something different? And she said, oh, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I was thinking about something with collage. Oh, sure. She was always game for whatever I wanted to try. So the Scooter Mouse in the Pothole is done with collage, watercolor, and acrylic. This one had a lot of tissue paper and some, I think you might even be able to see some words coming through where the circles are. And also right on the tree. And I had the best time with that. I guess it was also on this book that I had created some dancing teddy bears and chicken and cow cutouts. Miss Maddie was always having special projects for the children, and so they were included in these books that I couldn't just draw a picture. I had to actually do them and then go from there. So I was the one that had a great time with the all the projects, and this was super good entertainment during COVID. But best of all, best of all, my inner child came out, and I'm still enjoying playing with collage and paint. Thank you.
Thank you. And this double page spread may be an allusion subconsciously to the shoebird.
I was wondering if the cat was a positive and the mouse was an allusion to the seabird too. It looked a little bit like Freddie might be after Mockingbird. Thank you, Allison. Cheryl, uh,
Thank you.
we'll take questions. Let's just have Joanne, and then we can take questions for our guest, and then we can move on to talking about Eudora's essays. Joanne, you want to tell us about office supply and Eudora?
Yes, I will. My little notes are not nearly as creative, and I'm so glad to meet Cheryl. I love your drawings and watercolors, and I too took some drawing lessons from Lucy Webb Millsap's.
I remember meeting her when I
Yeah.
first came to Millsap. She was still on the faculty. Yeah.
But my dad worked, as Suzanne said, my dad worked for the office supply company from kind of a young age. He had to he was at Millsaps and had to leave because his father died, and he needed to support his mother and 4 sisters. And he was there for probably more than 40 years and retiring in the early 80s. So, and I have been away from Jackson since 1973. I grew up there. But so I'm relying on my memory and how I loved going to the office supply and loved the book department in particular. And I have 2 younger brothers, so they added some things that they remembered. And then I did look up a few things on the internet. But I'll just tell you briefly about office supply and how its connection with the shoebird. It's located at 509 East Capitol Street, and this is in the first block of Capitol Street. If you're facing the Capitol, it would be on your right-hand side. And it was started in 1929 by Boyd Campbell. Jacksonians will be familiar with that name. And in 1919, he had started the Mississippi School Supply Company. The the building that they were in at 509 East Capitol was a three-story space with a mezzanine floor. And I guess that was sort of popular. So the front part of the store had a very high ceiling. On the first floor, they sold office supplies, and then they had a book department. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that after we talk about what else they sold. They sold furniture on the second. I mean, they had furniture on the second floor and accessories for commercial spaces. And then on the mezzanine floor, they had offices for their salesmen and the design department and the clerical staff and the vice president and president of the company. But besides selling the office supplies and books and furniture, they did do design offices and commercial spaces, and then they oversaw the installation. My brother told me this, that in 1996, Mississippi State University School of Architecture established the Jackson Community Design Center at 509 East Capitol. And my dad had died before that, so I wasn't in Jackson. I wasn't aware of that. I tried to find out what happened to office supply, and it merged with Mississippi School Supply. So it's now MISCO, and they do all kinds of spaces, educational spaces, healthcare, offices, whatever. And it's interesting that company is still around after 100 years. But to the book department, these are my memories from the 60s. It was on the first floor. It was run by a very capable lady named Mrs. Odell Herbert, and she was very, very good, and she just knew everything. It was a fun part of the store to visit. They had a lot of pretty stationery and things related to letter writing. And I think that I don't know when the book department started or whose idea it was, if it was Mrs. Herbert's or what, but she was there in my memories when I was in Jackson. It may have started in the late 1940s because my mother, after she returned from being in the Navy and being in Hawaii, worked there, and that's where she met my dad. But I was curious of what bookstores were in Jackson at that time in 1964 when the Shoeburg was published. And there was one, I found one, Marshall's Music and Bookstore, established in 1938 on Ferry Street. So it served African Americans. But as Alice and I, neither one could remember any other bookstores. We used libraries when we were growing up. Lemuria, where Alice's books are, and which is a lovely store, didn't come into being until 1975. And then there's another bookstore in North Jackson, which is called the Book Rack, and they deal in quality paperbacks. But to answer your question about if there was a book signing, I don't think so. I know I would have heard of that growing up. I would have been in high school then. And I'm sure it would have been talked about by my dad, and my mother would have been interested, and I'm sure we would have gone to it. So I'm sorry to disappoint that I don't have any information on that. But I think it's interesting that her books were in a book department in an office supply store.
I do too, and I've heard Eudora talk about office supply and having her books there. I suspect that collecting became more and getting autographed copies became more popular later on, and not at that point in time. All right. Well, I do want to point out that Scooter Mouse books are available. Joanne said at Lemuria Bookstore, if any of you would like to get copies of them. And I don't know if you can order them on Amazon or not, Alice.
You can order online from Lemuria.
Okay, online from Lemuria. Thank you.
Small bookstores.
Susan Jones. Yeah.
I just want to say Eudora was so accommodating that if people wanted the book signed, they went by there or got one of her friends to take the books to her.
Yeah, to the house.
Still, when I was little, and now I have several people have given them to the house, but my aunt was a high school friend, so she would get ones for all of us and for the parents and everything. And Christmas, when Eudora had a new book, AMA would get 20 signed and there'd be to you. I mean, Eudora was just accommodating to her friends and acquaintances about signing the book. So I don't ever remember going to get a book signed somewhere, but all of mine are signed because of AMA and Eudora being nice to her. So
Joelle,
thanks.
Yeah, I just want to comment that there's been such a sea change in book marketing these days. A lot of authors really complain about having to go on the road, sometimes even for up to a year, promoting and selling books and making appearances. And so promotions departments are really a thing now. But I wanted to ask Alice Mitchell, Cheryl both, what you make of Eudora Welty in this piece being pretty hard on series fiction. She says um, she didn't know why she with the Campfire Girl series, just tired or not having any taste. And I'm guessing, we know today so much about aesthetic development and brains that kids grow out. And I think there are real arguments to be made for series fiction, which are repetitions in several ways. We all reread. Alice pointed out that, in fact, children would enjoy repeated readings of the Schubert. And so I think we should talk about that just a little bit, especially with children. What are some of the virtues? The role of repetition, like internalizing vocabulary, I mean, all kinds of things. And I know that, Anna, that's right down your path too. But my favorite story about different stages of aesthetic development when I was teaching freshmen in a college classroom. And we must have read Faulkner's Barn Burning or something like that. And this kid who had been just stumbling along, frustrated, after the class one day, came in back into my office and he said he'd thrown his books in the air because he got it. He got barn burning, just the design fell into place. And I think there are stages of that go throughout life. So anyway, I'd like to ask the experts about that.
I'm just going to say that I am a great fan of series fiction even today.
Oh, yeah.
So I read murder mysteries and I like to read ones that are in series, so I keep meeting the same characters.
But the best murder mysteries have a new element. In fact, Laurie King, in her first series, San Francisco Detective, had a main character and a central character. I can't remember which was which, but we'll call it the central character for a particular novel, who was used up in that novel. Extremely interesting, had a piece of the case, and the main character moved on. So yes, I'm a big series reader too.
Yeah. And the problem with series is a lot of times you find the writer sort of repeating. I want to ask you and Cheryl about this, repeating the same sort of techniques, the same plot devices, the same sort of expressions. After a while, you're keyed into it. You get maybe a little tired, but
Yeah.
there's something wonderful about the series as well. Alice, you and Cheryl want to talk about that?
Well, I'll just make the comment that when I was trying to get some books in some of the children's stores here, I had maybe 2 or 3 Scooter Mouse books, and they said, well, they really were interested in series. They wanted more than, so that was my uh, problem with that. And you're right, with the publishing company, you've got to do pretty much your own marketing, and that makes it really difficult if that's not your thing, and it's not really my thing. But
Quick
for other
question.
series, my husband is always complaining if he gets too far into some mystery series that they hit a point where they all sound alike, and then he loses interest in that particular author. So,
Excuse me, don't you think though that the Scooter Mouse books in a way are series in the same way that Agatha Christie
Yes.
novels are series? Poirot doesn't change that much, Miss Marple, etc. But so they rejected Scooter Mouse as series fiction?
well, no, they want, at the time, I didn't have enough.
Oh, I see.
Oh,
Oh,
They were wanting more.
got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, just
that's what I was about to say. That's a
Oh, it's
series.
not a series.
So now we have 5, and they even sell as as a group of 5.
Good.
But
Cheryl,
these
you
are local color type stories. Miss Maddie was an icon. She uh, died in January of this year at the age of 91. And Scooter Mouse has been her imaginary friend probably for almost 50 years, and generations of children, I'm one of them, just believe in Scooter Mouse. I met Scooter Mouse when I took my children to Story Hour. So
Yeah.
So she was your inspiration, yeah. And it's interesting. These books are kind of a tribute to friendship, which is another nice connection to Eudora Welty as well. I also wanted to point out, I was really interested in the way you wanted to vary the techniques that you used in the drawings. And you wanted to vary the plots.
oh yes,
You're trying to keep the series fresh.
Probably my
definitely.
favorite
And your own
illustration.
interest fresh, yeah.
Can you guys see this? I didn't make a scan of it. But this is one of my favorite illustrations from Scooter Mouse in the Pothole. And it's such an intricate collage that incorporates, like, these are typewriter tiles um, onto a laptop. It's just like old and new. There's so much interesting texture. Yes, these illustrations are beautiful.
Thank you. My
Oh.
art room is overflowing with collage papers.
You and Joseph Cornell.
Yeah. I think the illustrations are so important today, and they provide variety. At the same time, repetitions, kids are internalizing not just vocabulary, but patterns and plots.
Mhm.
Just reading and reading. Working in expertise. Anna, does that sound right?
That's absolutely correct. Like, I think Suzanne and I were talking before everybody joined us. Some of my favorite books whenever I was a young reader were of the Magic Treehouse series. And it's a fun series that, like, you can read in order, but you can also jump in really at any point in time and still understand, because it's a lot of pattern recognition and repetition. But that sets you up to be a more structured reader later on in life. Those kids need those entry points to begin to understand things, and then maybe later series it'll become more complex.
I think that's right. I mean, my favorite books, I was a big baseball fan, and still am as a child. My father taught me to play right along with my brothers. And my favorite books, I now own copies of them. I got them from the library, of course, were Larry of the Little League, Larry Leads Off, and Larry Comes Home. Three books about a Little League baseball player named Larry. And so I bought myself copies of them, and I have them. I cherish them. And I think the librarian thought that, I was kind of a hopeless uh, kid. But what happened for me was it was a love of reading. And then I went on to more, not to Mark Twain just as soon as you did, but eventually to Mark Twain, but to the Brontes, to Jane Austen, to George Eliot, I didn't get to Dickens. My sister found Dickens. And so we ended up readers. And I loved reading that about Eudora, that was that love of reading, the love of the book, holding the book in your hand, and um, that then leads you into a lifetime of reading. And today, it's still my greatest entertainment pleasure is to read, far more than movies or television or games, is sitting and reading. And I hope we're not losing that love of reading, which a lot of high school teachers caution me about. Joe Ellen?
Given that point, students are reading the ability to read long texts like, Moby Dick, forget it, unless there's a course that beats them through. But Allison, Cheryl, and Anna, I have one last question about adults. How do what's your kid meter? How do you know what children will like? Um, and even Welty, when we write about children's literature and whatever, we're all adults doing it. Even when we remember reading fairy tales, we're adults with perspectives on how we felt as a kid reading fairy tales or the Schubert or Scooter Mouse or whatever. But how does your kid IQ function in this?
I'll let Alice and Cheryl start. I have a funny story though.
I look forward to the funny story. I just love children, and I love seeing through their eyes. And my background is high school English teacher, but from time to time, I would take a Dr. Seuss book to the high school and read Dr. Seuss. So I just, and I love vocabulary. I try to use, especially with my verbs, I try to use words that would stretch their vocabulary.
Thanks. You have good kid sense.
Thank you.
I know that both Eudora, Reynolds Price, Elizabeth Bowen, and their conversations with each other on paper and in person were thought that childhood experiences were the most indelible and the ones which really came through in their writing for adults, so that those childhood memories, not necessarily just of reading, but of experience in general, those indelible memories sort of nourishing the fiction in all kinds of ways. Anna,
Oh, my funny story. So I think whenever I'm asking kids, whenever I was working at the library, like, I would start with, what are you interested in? What do you like to do? And that would be where you would get that entry point. But what I love about the way that Eudora writes about children's literature is that we all have a child in us. And then from that, we should not condescend to kids, because they have an intellectualism that can surprise even us. And the most surprising thing that ever happened to me when I was at the library, I have a mug from a video game that I play. And these little children characters are like working a job. And a patron comes in. She loved the mug, she loved the game, and she's like, "That's kind of child labor, isn't it?" And I was just like flabbergasted that this child is able to be and thinking critically about something so silly as a video game. And, she's doing that definitely in all of the things that she's reading too. And so understanding that even though they're children, they think about big things, we just have to put it down at a level where they can think about it in smaller bites.
shall we talk about the essay on fairy tales, and then we can come back to a sweet devouring if we want to. What about on fairy tales stands out to you? What Welty is saying here about the reading of fairy tales. Anyone want to comment? She says fairy tales are severe and uncondescending. Severe and uncondescending. And later she says they are filled with cruelty, with unsympathetic characters and anti-social manners. What about this aspect of fairy tales and children's reading? Yeah, Kathy.
I loved the comment, the kind of finality that really slams the door, that children like that, almost brutal. And I think that she saw fairy tales as a way to introduce children to the real world, because life is like that. Sometimes things are rather severe and unexpected. And I just like that particular phrase.
Yeah, he ate Red Riding Hood.
Yeah.
Freddie the cat eats the mockingbird. The mockingbird is gone, and nobody's shedding any tears for him either. So that desire to say, okay, here's a way you can introduce children to the truths about life, which are not always pleasant. Where you are going to encounter evil, and they'll come to respect the power of evil through the fairy tale, and be initiated into, yeah, to the truth of human experience instead of a partiality. What else about fairy tales stands out here? Eudora Welty herself wrote a kind of fairy tale for adults. It was called The Robber Bridegroom, and it drew on a fairy tale. We talked about it, didn't we? We've had our session. Yeah. So we know all the fairy tale links in that novella. So here she is as an adult drawing on fairy tales to write for adults.
At the risk of speaking just a little bit too much, I would love to point out the thing that you mentioned before. Like, not only does Eudora have this sense of finality in some of her writing here, you know, the mockingbird's eaten, he's not coming back. But then there's also an ambiguity that is still left to be interpreted in fairy tales and in Miss Welty's writing. And I think that like she highlights that on the second to last page of the article. It's like, you know, we are all brothers, but some of us are loveless. Like, you know, yes, there is this evil, but then there is this connection between us as well.
I think also what you're pointing to, let me get Mary to speak first here, then I'll come back to my point. Mary.
So my comment was about her description of fairy tales as smooth as pebbles washed up out of the sea. Yet what a character they've kept. And then she further talked about that they survive because they're good stories. They're worn smooth because they're told over and over and over again. And it made me think about her and, you know, the things that she was focused on, that she wanted to tell a good story.
Yes, and that fairy tales come out of this oral tradition, and in the retelling, they've been perfected over time.
Yeah.
So there's that, and she was a great reviser, I will say, not as a young writer, but the more she wrote, the more she revised, and so here is that search for that kind of perfection, which you never get. You're never going to achieve, but that quest for it, and drawing upon these tried and true tales. You know. I wanted to point to something else Anna had said, and that's in the last paragraph of the essay. All serious writers deal at bottom with the mysteriousness of human life, and the fairy tales gave that mysteriousness its first childhood language, a language like any other, a familiarity which can always be drawn on and can always enrich. So that whole business of mystery and the mystery business. So you may have that moment of resolve, but you also have that sense of mystery, of the unexplainable, of the unknowable, which is she deals with so importantly in her fiction. Yeah, Joellen?
I've just been looking at some, you know, in this essay, Welty just drops all kinds of statements like that children understand irony, they get it from fairy tales. I mean, I would loved an example, but the statements are really interesting. And Kathy mentioned the kind of finality that slams the door, and this is all in a speeded up mode, probably because of kids' attention span, but it's toward the bottom of 109. It says fairy tales are pitiless. There is no time for pity. That kids, you know, probably do zip through things sometimes. But I loved that in fairy tales where they're hard facts, you know, recalcitrant material, that they learn what's true and false before they start learning what's sad and cheerful.
Yeah, I love that.
These are real, you know, very specific claims that are really interesting. Plus, children were nowhere around when fairy tales were invented. That was kind of speaking to that years long process.
Yeah, they
Of what
shaped it
shaped
as
them.
being the audience, but they're not the authors, they're the audience. Yeah. I love that too. Irony, Puss in Boots, the three sons, the son who inherits seemingly the least just gets the cat. He ends up the wealthiest, so what seems to be the least turns
Mhm.
out to be the most, and that so that irony of the story. So children are born understanding irony, she says. Yeah. And I think you're right, Joel, that maybe because this is a newspaper article, there are
Mhm.
these little pithy statements that are not expanded. So it's one after another.
Yeah, yeah.
Food for thought. Yeah. Anything else here in on fairy tales?
Questions for you, Suzanne. I just put question marks next to these couple of sentences that I didn't quite couldn't quite make out. They're both on page 110. Is that the end of the first large paragraph? Sentimentality which Jack can't kill is guilty of more harm than any threats of fee fi fo fum. I would love to kind of hear your thoughts on this.
I think what she's saying is that children don't need to be protected from stories that are filled with frightening things. Hansel and Gretel, the way the parents treat the children, being in the house of the witch. You know, the children can cope with that, and it's much better to let them face the realities of danger and of cruelty than it is to say, oh, everything's going to turn out all right, sweetie. This is.
And to be sentimental about it, that's what's dangerous. Gotcha. The next question I had was about the paragraph following the one that follows that one. It begins.
I marked it for us to talk about. Go
Oh,
ahead.
good. So that's, yep, perfect.
Human truths, bolder and often more appalling than we know what to do with, much less what to tell children about them, do seem to get through to children in their fairy tale disguise without harm to the children or too much distortion of the truth. Children can make distinctions in an order of their importance. Before they come to realize what's sad or cheerful, they learn what's false, what's true. This is what Joe Ellen was talking about. Yeah. And I think that, that's when you think about the shoe bird, or you think of that, it's a fantasy world. And by having it in that fantasy world, you can talk about realities that seem sort of distant from your own, and you can face the ugliness of them as in a fairy tale world. Once upon a time, in a place far, far away, you can face it there, and you don't have to and children can come to terms with it in ways that they might not otherwise. I think that's what she's saying. Joellen, you were going to say something there?
No, thanks.
Yeah. I want to point out that fairy tales continue. My friend Leanne Bryan likes to quote Eudora saying that she used mythology and fairy tales the same way she would salt and pepper. Sprinkle on the seasoning on the main course. So that she's not setting up to retell a fairy tale or to retell a myth, but elements of that myth come in to enrich and enlarge the story, or as she says here, fairy tales can always be drawn on and can always enrich. And I think they do enrich her fiction. So if you think about a story like At the Landing and a fairy tale like Sleeping Beauty, the kiss that wakes up Sleeping Beauty, the handsome prince. But in this case, the handsome prince, Billy Floyd, is really a danger.
Right.
And so drawing on the fairy tale, but doing something else with it. Or Mrs. Morrison in June Recital talking about Miss Eckhart's music studio and said, it's like the witch's house in Hansel and Gretel, even with the witch. And, but then there's Miss Eckhart bringing to her students something that they so need as well. And the power of the music, the power of the emotion in the music that transcends the sentimental or the mundane. And so there's those kinds of illusions. Or in The Winds, Josie thinking of Cornella across the street as being like Rapunzel.
Mhm.
and needing to escape. So here are these little bits of fairy tales coming in to stories and enriching those stories, not taking them over, but she's drawing upon them, I think. And of course, then she wrote her own quite extended fairy tale, and that's The Robber Bridegroom. But she's drawing on lots of different fairy tales there, not just the story of the robber bridegroom. So again, using them to enrich, not to dominate, but to drawing on them, I think. So the adult response to the fairy tale continues. Anything else? Go ahead,
Go
Anna.
ahead. I was gonna go ahead.
Oh, you.
I was gonna see if we wanted to say anything else about Sweet Devouring. We only have about 10 minutes left here.
Susan.
Well, this is a little random, but I had not gotten out these books before. And I just wanted to commend to everybody the essay that's right in front of Sweet Devouring is a pageant of birds. And it is, I mean, the lights were coming on. In the 30s, Eudora goes to the black church, befriends the woman, comes back, sees the birds, and it's all the description of the birds and the shoebird that she didn't write for 30 more years and
Yeah.
how wonderful the parrot is and all that. And I was just like, okay, I have to tell the clerk that. So it's on mine, it's on page 755, right in front of Sweet Devouring's on 795. So I just got to the birds by mistake, but I was glad.
It's in the eye of the story, and that's a great thing to point out, Susan. Yeah.
Well, it's also in stories, S's, and memoirs that
The
y'all didn't tell
library
us it was
there.
in that same book that we had. And I still want to get the other book that Pearl did. I don't have occasions, and I need that one. So I thank you for getting us to that one too. Because sometimes you don't get to all these essays and everything.
Pearl
Or
has
at
put
least I
together
don't. So this was good.
a lot of pieces that hadn't been
Put
published
together. Right.
book form before. Yeah.
Right. So thank you.
A Sweet Devouring, I think, is a wonderful description of the love of reading and the way the life of the reader grows. And to me, it's also an endorsement of read for children. Read whatever. You don't need to worry about being discriminating. That's going to come. You're going to make those kind of decisions later, but read whatever comes to hand. Even those Crest books that have the pervert as with the Campfire Girls. Read them, and eventually you're going to come out the other side. Here's the other book I wanted to show. This is my first book I learned to read from. It's called The Alphabet from A to Z, and it's a little golden book, and it begins, A is the apple for Jimmy to bite. B is the bed he sleeps in at night. C is the clock that goes tick tock tick. D is the dish for the doggy to lick. My mother, I memorized this book. I still have it. So I memorized it as a little girl. My mother thought I was very precocious and was reading, but of course I had only memorized the book. And now when my younger friends have babies, this is the book I buy for their children. And they may change Jimmy's name, but they still are learning the little rhymes about his experiences. So I wouldn't say this is great and sophisticated literature, but it shaped my life. It created a passion for reading in me at a very young age. Yeah, Susan. We're not hearing you, Susan. You unmuted. And then
I didn't have anything. That must be
I thought I
left
saw your
over.
hand up.
Okay, I'm sorry. Lower hand. Sorry.
Kathy.
I love when she talked about her aunt realizing that Eudora needed to have more books around than she could possibly read, and wanted to say that I too am afflicted with that. I have books under beds, up in closets. I mean, it's just a ridiculous thing to invest in so many old books, new books. Oh, I've read this book, but I need a copy of it hanging around. And it was really a joyful thing to me to go to Eudora's home and see all those books laid out on the sofa and just left there because that's what my sofa looks like too. So I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, that is a wonderful thing. And I think that the love of books is well, it is a sweet devouring, and I really appreciate her sharing that with us. Anything else about a sweet devouring? Uh, Susan, I wanted to know who was the classmate who wrote the book and published it herself. Do you know? Which of Eudora's classmates published that book? It may be someone we don't know.
I don't know.
Yeah. Well, there's another little research project. Probably not a pursue. Yeah. Um, all right.
We are just 5 minutes out. Do we have any other things that we want to say before we conclude?
I'm going to look at a sweet devouring because I thought I had one more thing.
Charlotte asks
Oh, I
in the
know.
chat.
I wanted to let me just point out that the aunt who sent Eudora the St. Nicholas book is the aunt who wrote her mother that she thought Eudora was what the most brilliant child she had ever encountered and really was praising her. And that later on Eudora herself had a piece published in St. Nicholas.
Yeah.
So there are those connections. She doesn't mention that. Yeah, go ahead from the
So
chat.
Charlotte in the chat asks about the third story I included in the scans, the one that occurs after Sweet Devouring, the little store. She asks if this was a real place, and if so, what happened to the family?
Yes, it's the George Street Grocery. It's the building that became the George Street Grocery. So it was a little store. And in those days, we had little stores. You didn't go to the big supermarket. Sometimes you just walked to the little store on the corner, and that was theirs. And I don't know what happened to the family, but I think we could find out on newspapers.com. And someone may have already done it and written it up, and I'm just not realizing that. But that was a real place. I had forgotten you assigned that, Anna. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. And I just included these happenstance, kind of like I did with something else prior. You know, when we were discussing
Uh-huh.
the readings, I made the scans, and so they were just included even if they weren't assigned.
But I do think the little store is interesting because it does show that encounter with mystery and with danger that she talks about. Is the George Street Grocery still there? I think it's gone now.
I think you know, and I don't want to say wrong, but I've had somebody come and visit with.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Susan.
Yeah, it's still there.
Oh,
They're
good.
just not open all the time. Two sisters closed next door to it, but it's still there.
Okay, good. Joe Ellen?
I looked farther down in the paragraph that was mentioned about the great aunt in Virginia who gave her the issues of St. Nicholas magazine. Um, and this is where she tells about this not getting the last chapter of The Lucky Stone. And I don't know that she ever finished. I don't think she says, except she discovered rereading and that really worked. She doesn't really develop that or do very much about it, but it's interesting anyway that it's placed there.
Yeah. And her sense that if the book was finished and the story wasn't finished, there was no other place it could be finished. And she
Yeah, right.
didn't realize, this collection of magazine pieces that have been uh, reprinted, and you could find the conclusion. But so that was good, but also that sense of mystery and that the importance of rereading and the pleasures of rereading.
Yeah.
Or the pleasures of rereading are great. A lot of times I wish I could recapture the pleasure of first reading,
Yeah.
but I do enjoy the pleasures of rereading as well.
Gayatri Spivak was one of my undergraduate professors, and she told us in an approaches to literature class that ideally in a first read, you just kind of not whip through it necessarily, but just read without much critical stuff going on in your brain. She said, unfortunately, we can't do that in a college classroom. You probably wouldn't have time to read it twice. But she said, ideally, you do a first read as though you're having sex. You don't want to be unconscious, but you don't want to be overly conscious of it either. So that's her ideal first read.
There's a lot to be said for that.
I've remembered it.
Immerse yourself in the experience. Yeah.
Oh man, well, it is 1 o'clock. So with that, I think if there's nothing else, Suzanne, do you have any other final
I
comments?
just want to say, I think I've told you this before, I never would have on my own chosen for us to discuss the shoebird.
Mhm.
Anna and Trailer and Rachel Ott at the Welty House. Is there anyone else I should give credit to, Anna? Came up with this idea.
Arturo the parrot.
And I think it has been just marvelous to talk about the shoebird, to talk about children's literature, to talk about Welty's attitudes towards other writers, to talk about the work of other writers in children's literature and the experience of librarians. I'm so glad we did it, and I want to thank Anna and Rachel for making me do something new. So thank you. We don't know what we're going to do next, but we'll be back in touch.
Okay.
We're
Sure
talking.
will.
Suzanne, Anna, may I just note that the phrase fairy tale can mean everything and nothing. So I've been thinking about other ways of describing the shoebird, and as opposed to a romantic fantasy, what do you think about a satiric fantasy? Lightly satiric, but anyway, fantasy as a realm that Welty works for me.
I think that's good. I like that. I think Sam Jones calling it a fable is also
Yeah, yeah.
instructive. Oh, and I wanted to mention, I love the fact that Alice's books were turned into ballets, and I love seeing that.
Yes.
Yes, I love that.
So you and Eudora really have kind of parallel experiences with your children's books, and that's a wonderful thing, seeing it turned into a different art form. Yeah, it's a great experience to see that. Thank you.
This was a wonderful series. Thank you all so much for joining us as being a part of this discussion. Thank you, Suzanne and MDAH and the Eudora Welty Foundation. So just again, a reminder that the final recording will go out this Friday in the Welty at Home newsletter, as well as other supplemental materials like the chat transcript. And we will look forward to announcing our next selection for upcoming series, hopefully soon. So thank you all again.
Thanks.
Happy summer.
Enjoyed it.